Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to walk across the street to our friends at IFPRI. Let me first congratulate you, Shenggen and team, for what I thought was a very, very good, timely and thoughtful and well-researched report. We always look forward to it. One of my main messages is that we are aligning around the globe in our various capacities, whether it's in research, development, in academia, and other places, around the fact that our global food systems need to change. It is not just about agriculture or about productivity or about climate change or about all the various pieces that we are individually and collectively involved with. We need to get to the recognition that we need to profoundly look at this in a different way. Shenggen said it already, our current food system globally is unsustainable. We don't feed everyone, we don't have the right quality food, we waste a lot of food, we waste the resources, we have pollution issues. It is just, everybody knows it, but I don't think we are really clear how big the problem really is and that we really need to profoundly change the way we go about this. And I think that recognition has begun to evolve in the last 2 to 3 years. So we are on a really fast journey to move away from what we all did, including IFPRI and what we did at the World Bank and what many of you do 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, to the recognition that this all has to come together at some point. At the World Bank, we have developed our own vision, which is very similar to what you have laid out in your short presentation, Shenggen, but also in many of the reports coming out of this institution here. We need a food system that changes from being a part of the problem globally to a food system that's part of a solution. And that begins by providing incomes, by working for the poor, by creating jobs. It goes on to be much more sustainable in everything it touches, whether it's on GHG emissions. You all know that we are almost a third of global emissions. Yes, we can argue and debate, whether the percentages are right, but the bottom line is we are a huge part of the problem. We are a huge part of the land waste and overuse and water waste and overuse. We have pollution, probably culprit number 1 or 2, right after the emissions, the CO2 imbalance globally, the nitrogen balance globally is the worst of all the planetary boundary issues that we are facing. And we produce food that is not accessible, that doesn't have the right vitamins, that doesn't have the right quality, and that is not consumed in the way we should. Sorry, this sounds all a bit downbeat, does it? It is, however, a stark reality, because what we kind of believe is that things are getting better as we speak. Unfortunately, they're not getting better. The vision is that we need to increase food production by 35% in the next 15 years if we want to feed everyone. Current trends project a 20% increase if we continue to do what we're doing today. We look at health outcomes, obesity, undernourishment. The vision is to keep the obese population globally at 0.7 billion. Even that is too many, of course, but that seems a somewhat reasonable projection going forward if we do what Janet and others have suggested. The trend's very different. Trends go and get us to 1.4 billion and undernourishment to 0.5. If we want to get people out of poverty, we need income increases in the range of around 4.5% for those who live below $1.9 a day. It's not happening right now. Right now, the trends are trending around 2.5%. We do about half of what we need to be doing if we actually want to achieve what we are all talking about. And GHG emissions, you can see it yourself. We need to reduce global emissions, greenhouse gas emissions coming out of the food sector broadly by 25%, and that's very modest because others are doing more in other sectors, but the current trends will see us increase them by 13%. And this is just projecting out the next 15 years. If we don't profoundly change the way we go about this in every one of the dimensions that you've seen on the screen already today, it will not change. And I think the challenge is a lot bigger than what people actually think. I don't want to go into this because Shenggen mentioned the numbers. We have a triple burden of malnutrition. I want to focus a little bit in those 5 minutes on the third bucket that I showed in my first slide. The first one is the job, income, poverty focus. The second one is the sustainability focus with climate smart agriculture at its core. And the third one is what will happen to us as consumers. And there was a lot said about this already. We at the World Bank are also beginning to engage much more actively and directly in this equation and in this conversation, because it's very clear to us that there's a complete disconnect between what consumers are doing today and between what producers are producing today. And we've had this trend for several decades, and we need to bring the two back together and mutually reinforce each other. So we are clearly moving in that direction. We will actually launch a report in 2 weeks from now, around, I think it's on the 15th, 13th or 15th, I forgot, at our spring meetings, where we will dissect the topic along the lines of what you've heard from the previous speakers. What are the various elements and pieces of that nutritional equation? What is the quality? What is the vitamin issue? What is the nutrition, undernutrition, malnutrition, stunting issue that we need to deal with? And what's the obesity equation? And how do you get into consumers' heads and into producers' heads along the value chain to change the way we consume our food today? Now, this is very ambitious. I think it's much more difficult than the last 40 years where we focused largely on to increase production to meet consumer demand. But we have now come to the conclusion after, and I think it's just confirmed by everything we've heard earlier this morning, unless we tackle that side, the demand side of the equation, we will not get on top of it. The world cannot continue to consume the way it is today in the next 30 to 40 years. So we will get much more involved in this as well. Here's an interesting chart in what the situation looks like in low-income countries, middle-income countries, high-income countries. Of course, these are averages. Like Maximo said, averages only tell you a part of the story. Not in every country it is like that. But of course, the income levels in the low-income countries, the poverty head count's very high, undernourishment's high, and so is stunting of children under the age of 5. It's 37% on average, which is an outrageously high number. But very interestingly, in middle-income countries, the incomes go up, obviously. The undernourishment percentage goes down, but the stunting prevails, which is a very, very scary and very dangerous situation that we really need to get on top of. Because it is now increasingly clear that when you are not well nourished under the age of 5, it has an impact on your cognitive ability, and it is irreversible in many cases. Again, these are averages, but there is clear evidence to suggest if we don't get on top of that, you have a problem for the next generation or two. So again, at the World Bank, this will be an area where we will pay a lot more attention and a lot more emphasis in what we do going forward. Similar to what we've heard before, and again, Maximo said it very nicely about the food waste. It's true for everything we need to tackle, whether it's on the productivity side, whether it's on the diet issue, whether it's on food loss. All these issues, you have to do different things at different income levels. And I think it's still true that in the food loss situation, in low-income countries, it is more on the producer side, and it is more on the consumer side in the richer countries, but with variation. So we're trying to develop a matrix, which you will see when we launch our report in a couple of weeks, which will be very similar to what you've seen already, where we get much more specific what kind of intervention, what kind of policy, what kind of funding is needed to move the needle forward in all of these. Again, as I said at the outset, we have come a long way in the journey of understanding what it will take to achieve the many things that we've been discussing for decades now, which is get better food, higher productivity, get smallholders linked to the markets, get the consumers a better diet. We've come a long way, but we have never really put the pieces together. And I feel very, very good about the fact that wherever we go now, Schengen and as he mentioned in the beginning, we've spent the last 2 years at the World Economic Forum Global Advisory Council, where these ideas are being thrown around in a very interesting fashion between public, private, academia, and all the players around the world. And we come all to the same conclusions, essentially, that we need to tackle this holistically. And you do the research to do the underpinnings to help us really invest to save $4 to $5 billion a year that we invest in the agriculture and food system going forward in a much more intelligent, much more targeted, and much more coherent way than we have done before. We are committed on the World Bank side to shift our own way of thinking and our own way of investing in that direction, and underpinned by the research that you're all doing. So I want to give you that message. I actually feel today that what happens in research and what happens in development is a lot closer together than it was 10 years ago. We lived in different worlds before. Today we live in the same world, and I think that's very encouraging and a positive note. Thank you.